Oh, how times change. It feels like ages ago that Activision used to be one of the most prolific video game publishers. Every month, they'd be tossing games on the store shelves, the constant rehashes of Guitar Heroes, the endless sequel fodders of Skylanders and Call of Duty, and of course, the licensed games. It wasn't a proper year of gaming if you didn't see the How to Train Your Dragons, iCarly's, or whatever popular flavor of the month movie tie-in. But that's not to say that none of these were good. I mean, statistically, some have to be decent if you're releasing nearly, if not more than 50 games a year. Seriously, the 2000s were wild. MTV Pimp My Ride for the Wii. Why? These days, Activision slowed down immensely, with 2020 only having 7 releases, 5 of them being ports or remasters. The other 2, Crash 4 and Blops. So then that begs the question, what happened to the filler? What happened to the way more frequent lower budget licensed games, the small to large scale projects that we saw so often? Where's the sequel to Snoopy's Grand Adventure? Well, shortly after the release of a Ghostbusters and a very peculiar Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles video game, that would be it. In 2013, Activision announced that they'd be stepping away from licensed titles over time while letting the agreements expire. The first to go was James Bond, with the release of the very quickly thrown together 007 Legends, quite literally a Call of Duty clone, something that was recalled and taken off of digital store shelves mere months after it came out. By the way, the store removal thing, get used to it. But during this move away from licensed games, Activision would team up with one of the most prolific game developers out there in order to make 3 games that by concept alone have incredible potential. 3 games that got a lot of hype, and all of it was well deserved. But I guess that's what happens when you work with Platinum Games.
So yo, it's Austin, and today I'm going to be talking about an often overlooked trilogy of licensed games that, by all means, should have been all-time classics. In the mid-2010s, which is kind of weird to say, we were treated to 3 releases of 3 very popular franchises published by Activision and developed by Platinum Games, and I'm very excited to talk about all of them. But we have to start with Platinum Games. They were a Japanese studio who were starting to get a lot of notoriety at the time, so you wonder why they would step in and do 3 licensed games.
Platinum's a group that you either know or you don't. They're a band of Japanese ex-Capcom devs who have leaned heavily into the character action genre of games, making really fast-paced and ridiculous adventures with an emphasis on single-player gameplay. No microtransactions, no live games, just tightly designed experiences that are fun to play. You've probably heard of Bayonetta, Vanquish, Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, Wonderful 101, or, Nier Automata. Never mind all of the pre-Platinum games by key devs like Hideki Kamiya, Shinji Mikami, and Atsushi Inaba. God Hand, anyone? Platinum rocks, but their games weren't always known for pushing sales. Until recently, Platy was just a developer, so they would always rely on getting hired to create stuff, and that would shift between Sega, Nintendo, Konami, and Square Enix, all Japanese publishers. But for some reason, in the mid-2010s, they'd be picked up by Activision for some work. Weirdly, after they already announced that they'd be moving away from licensed games, but they also probably still had the rights, so why not hire a developer who's known for quality? As a fan of Platinum's work, the idea of them working with Western properties was awesome, and I for one was excited to see what we could get. It's not like some unknown developer making an assembly line of games. This was a top-tier dev. It'd be like waking up to find out that HAL Labs was making a Gundam game, or more realistically, Insomniac making Spider-Man. Confusing? Sure. Exciting? Yes. There is the question of why Platinum Games would decide to work on a bunch of licensed titles, knowing that at this point they had an awesome streak of killer games and had contracts with companies like Nintendo, what with Wonderful 101, Bayonetta 2, and Star Fox Zero on the way. But I guess more work is good. So come summer 2014 and a weird trailer would drop. No gameplay, just some slick animation. The Legend of Korra for the everything but Wii U, because no one liked the Wii U. Despite Bayonetta 2 dropping in the same month, same week in the States. The trailer itself wasn't anything special, but this little logo was. Also, this too. That's a weird one. So we've got a Platinum developed Korra game coming out only on digital stores. They also announced a 3DS exclusive strategy RPG for Korra made by Webfoot Technologies of Legacy of Goku fame, but that's a different story. Now at the time, it was pretty rare for a game like this to be a digital only release, and it's a little confusing too. The Legend of Korra was big. It's the follow-up to the immensely popular Avatar: The Last Airbender, 2 shows that broke Netflix streaming records as recently as last past year. Korra's got a bit of a complicated legacy with a ton of ups and downs, but Airbender is generally highly regarded. I was slightly out of the age bracket for Avatar when it was airing, but cultural osmosis has shown me quite a bit. It's also told me not to watch the Shyamalan film. I've heard good things.
So the first major game we're going to be talking about is based off of Nickelodeon's The Legend of Korra, which came out on the digital everything. I actually managed to put this on my PlayStation 5, and I'm wondering if I'm the first person to do that. It's kind of weird that you can play this and not Hitman Go, but it's fine.
The Korra game takes place between seasons 2 and 3 of the show, and it actually released around the same time as the third season. Good timing. And the story was written and supervised by multiple of the show's creators, so it's not just some junk plot thrown out by people who may not understand what's going on. The 2D cutscenes are by some of the original people, the art is by the original staff, and it's got the same voice actors. It's all too typical for a tie-in to go for the sound-alike or pull the Game Mill Nickelodeon thing and decide not to use voice actors at all, but they did it right. In order to make the plot into video game though, we have to MacGuffin away Korra's airbending powers so that she has to Metroid her way back to full strength over time. It's silly, but it works in context of what they're doing. Now, similar to all Platinum games, Korra is a 3D character action game. There's a lot of emphasis on hand-to-hand combat in the beginning, and it wants you to play well. You get your butt kicked pretty easily in this one, and your HP's a lot smaller than it looks, so dodging is key. It starts with a brief tutorial showing you each of the elements you can control before yoinking them away and throwing you into a mini game called Pro Bending. This is celebrated like a major sport in this world, and it was a big part of the show. So yeah, why not throw it in? Well, because it's definitely a little half-baked. You basically just throw projectiles at enemies, and if you can put them behind a certain line, you move up. Rinse, repeat until the entire enemy team is over the edge. It's fine, it exists. Then a bunch of masked assailants come out of nowhere, they steal your powers, and it's time to go level to level, punching dudes and getting stronger. Now, if we were to look at just critic reviews from the time, the reception is pretty lackluster. Still better than God Hand, apparently, but a good old 5 out of 10 across the board. And there's one major word that floats across the waters: bland. The Legend of Korra is bland. The worst Platinum game ever made. A shallow story, shallow characters, undercooked. Not what's normally expected from Platinum games. Well, duh. It's $15. What did people expect from a digital-only licensed tie-in game that sold for $15? Bayonetta 2? You could just go get that in the same week. I think that given the context of what Korra is, this thing's been unfairly judged. I don't think that Korra's fantastic or anything, but I'm also not willing to condemn the thing, especially when compared to every other Avatar: The Last Airbender video game. Like, this is night and day. So there's a bunch of different stages here, each with its own set of challenges and hidden stuff. If you go off the beaten path, which happens rarely, you can find little treasure chests to open, sometimes requiring a bending element to do so. But the combat is the meat of the experience. We've got 4 different stances of fighting, each tied to either fire, water, earth, or air. Fire is fast punchy, water is ranged, earth is the big punching, and air is area of effect. Though out of the gate, since you don't have the abilities, you just kind of punch and kick in those styles. You've got normal and heavy attacks that can be comboed, and it feels like a very standard Platinum affair. You can block, dodge, jump, and you better dodge. You can also parry attacks by guarding at the same time they hit you, which is useful in pro bending because it'll reflect projectiles. Parrying will also throw you into a QuickTime event where you can deal major hits to enemies and some bosses. Sometimes you have to guard in QuickTime events too, and that can be kind of jarring at first, but it's pretty easy when you get it down. Mechanically, it's light, but solid. Now, you unlock the elemental abilities as you go through the game, and this is where it gets a little more interesting. Suddenly you'll need to hit dudes from afar, which you can do with water. You'll need to break shields, which you can do with earth. The more you use them, the more they level up, the harder you can charge up your chi and do bigger damage, and the longer your combos get. By the time you're smashing dudes around and you get all 4 of the elements unlocked and at a fun place with a lot of combo versatility, you're about 3.5 hours into the game. And then another half hour goes by and you hit credits. Oh, Oh no, Korra is short, real short. But sometimes I was totally forgetting that this was a $15 budget title. There's a lot of moments where the combat is really fun and it has that distinct platinum touch to it. When you're all powered up and in that last stage, you're doing crazy combos and it has moments of brilliance. In fact, if you swap over to extreme mode, which unlocks after you finish the game, it's like pretty fun, at least mechanically. You get so much variety in the moves that you do and you can alternate between the stances and it's legit neat. But unfortunately, in just about every other aspect, it kinda lacks that oomph that the bigger budget Platinum games have. They created a tight action game that will definitely appeal to fans of the Nickelodeon show, but the Platinum fans definitely saw this as lacking. It doesn't have much reach outside of that. But if there's one positive thing you can say here, it's that you can definitely tell the developers cared. The animations of moves look great. The inclusion of the minigame while mid was cool. There's even unlockable costumes. There is one other minigame here in the form of an endless runner where you ride Naga and collect the item shop currency. In this mode, you just kind of like go. You can use your unlocked airbending powers to jump higher or shoot projectiles. It doesn't really add much to the experience, and the boss fight on her is frustrating to say the least. I don't know if it needed to be, but it is there. All in all, I think Korra is a slight bit better than the reviews say. It is very clearly a budget title, one with more than likely a tight deadline, limited scope, and a niche audience in mind. It's not a game that shows much charm or any character interactions, but it's just a solid action romp that is a little more mechanically interesting than you'd think. Also, weirdly, the lead game designer here was Isao Nagishi, the guy who's also a lead game designer on Nier Automata. So yeah, you can see bits and pieces of like evolution here. I don't know if I would recommend it to people who aren't a fan of the TV show, but unfortunately you can't pick it up anymore anyways. It was taken off all store sales without warning 3 years after its release on December 21st, 2017. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Xbox.
1 down, 2 to go. The Legend of Korra was not a big success and might have actually been kind of detrimental to Platinum's reputation at the time, but I think it's a little weird considering it was a $15 game and people are trying to treat it like a AAA thing, which is absurd. I think it was fine for what it was. At this point, there was no sign that Platinum and Activision were going to be teaming up for another game. By all means, this was just going to be a one-off, but shoot forward a year and, well, this video is called the Trilogy.
E3 2015. About half a year after Korra came out would come the announcement of yet another Platinum Activision collaboration, Transformers Devastation. Weirdly, they weren't making any big announcements about their partnership beyond the occasional game here and there, but immediately the reception was mixed. There was hype from their legacy, of course, but Korra was definitely a little hit to their reputation. However, these initial trailers were sick. I always thought that Activision used the Transformer license well. A lot of the games that they made came out better than you'd think. The standouts, of course, being Transformers War for and Fall of Cybertron. These two games were awesome, and the developer, High Moon Studios, did a great job. Sure, they've just been assimilated into the Call of Duty machine these days, but these co-op third-person shooters had a lot going for them. It's just a shame you can't play the co-op in these at all anymore. I need it. Supposedly wanting one last hurrah, they summoned Platinum Games to make a Transformers game not based off of a Michael Bay film, and they called it Transformers Devastation. This freaking rocks.
Transformers Devastation. This box art's kind of a mess, especially if you compare it to everything else from that year, which is like darkness everywhere.
In 2021, the modern single-player game is all about narrative. It's about hard-hitting experiences, character moments, and making you fall in love with whatever characters, possibly buy merchandise, and getting you invested. In 2015, it was kind of like that too. Maybe not as, but let's just say there wasn't much demand for a like 3-hour-long button mash and action game based off of the Transformers, especially at $50. And that would have basically nabbed you Bloodborne. And well, that's exactly the reason that I didn't pick up Devastation at launch. However, eventually it did sink down to like $20. I picked it up and whew,
it was a good time. Transformers Devastation is a really fun character action game. It follows your classic Autobots, Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, and Sideswipe as they're fighting off an invasion caused by Insecticons, controlled by Megatron and the Decepticons. Constructicons are here as well. There's a lot of cons and going on here, but it's your basic save the world from evil plot. Now, immediately as a major mark against the game, you cannot play as any of the Decepticons, something the High Moon Studios games did and did extremely well. But those games were very clearly much higher budgeted, dare I say AAA, and Devastation definitely had a tighter budget going on. Despite all of that, Platinum went hard with their combat, and they didn't have to. This one was directed by Metal Gear Rising Revengeance director Kenji Saito, and you can tell a lot of the cutscenes and the general feel has the same vibe down to the ridiculous heavy metal soundtrack. Platinum games are known for some of their battles turning into extremely high stakes scenarios, and while Korra didn't quite give us that, Devastation does. Sometimes I was forgetting that I was playing as a robot due to how crisp and fluid the models looked and moved and some of the ridiculous actions they were doing. Space fight? Sure, why not? It's just missing a drill. So the combat here is good. You've got different ways that you can pull off combos with alternating face buttons as well as ranged attacks. You can equip different weapons, that'll give you different styles of melee strikes, and guns with the occasional elemental effect. You can just shoot rockets or a machine gun, though I'd say it's pretty useful to use a sniper rifle. There's a witch time style effect for dodging from Bayonetta, and it makes an appearance here, and dodging straight into a perfect headshot with a sniper is gonna do a stupid amount of damage. The only issue with that is that gear itself is kind of confusing and overwhelming. You get a currency that you can spend to upgrade your stats by passive effects and gear, but there's so many pickups that it looks more like a looter shooter than your standard Platinum game. I think it would have made way more sense to just assign certain styles of guns and melee weapons to only one of the Autobots and have them upgrade them to be easier to read. Scrolling through a menu and looking for items to consume mobile game style as upgrades is just a little much. That, and it's kind of weird to have Optimus fighting with dual swords. It's a little strange. This wouldn't be Transformers without transforming though, of course, and Devastation doesn't disappoint. You can hold down R1 to transform at any time, but also melee combos give you the option to use a vehicle attack as a finisher, so you'll be doing absolutely ridiculous stunts in the air while juggling dudes around like it's nothing. This looks pretty ridiculous against massive bosses that you fight, but I'm glad they threw it in. Yeah, air donuts, that's fine. As a whole, the animation of everything looks amazing, and you can tell the devs cared about making each of the Autobots look and feel like they would in any iteration of the cartoon. Did Optimus need to have this many stages of walking and running? No, absolutely not, but they did it, and that's that Platinum touch. Peter Cullen's voicing Optimus, the music was composed by Vince DiCola, who did the original movie from the 80s. The story was even an original thing written by one of the former comic writers. Activision and Platinum definitely pulled out all the stops in comparison to Korra. The cinematics alone show that. The only real big negatives I can think of are just a lack of variety in the maps, as you kind of just have 3 areas you play through twice. You can tell it's a budget game there, even though it wasn't priced like one. Overall, Devastation got a pretty well-deserved reception, with the major points against it being specifically how pricey it was for how much game you got. So there's 3 difficulties you can play through. You can upgrade the Autobots as much as you want. Through the campaign, you unlock Wheeljack and Grimlock as playable characters, the latter of which can smash dudes as a little T-Rex. There's a lot of side missions you can do in some of the chapters, which unlock in a challenge mode with some standalone things. There's also some unlockable art, but that's it really. And that's not really gonna sit well with the player who just wants to play through something once, which is a majority of the gaming audience these days. Critically, Transformers Devastation earned a bunch of 6s and 7s simply because it was a little out of time with the type of game it was. But when you look at all the little stuff, the high production of the cinematics, all the charm it exudes, and the fact that it runs well enough, I'd put this one closer to an 8.5. I'm not even a huge Transformers fan, and I can appreciate this for all it's worth. Just maybe $50 was a bit much. If you want to play this nowadays, and you should, you're gonna have to hunt down a copy physically, as it was taken off of digital store shelves in December 2017, the same day as Legend of Korra. So if you were waiting to buy this on Christmas Day that year, you were out of luck.
So we got one more game in the video, and it is of course the one with the biggest potential. Now, the following franchise has had so many cool and successful games that, you know, when you take a franchise like it and put platinum with it, you would expect a 10 out of 10. And of course, I'm talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
TMNT and video games were for the longest time a god tier combination. Even though that first NES game is ridiculously difficult, pretty much everything bearing the Turtles name was guaranteed to slap. Before I got my hands on Hyperstone Heist, I played Manhattan Project. Even the early GBA games are great, but then it started to get a little weird. Things started to become these underwhelming Power Stone clones and 3D beat 'em ups, and definitely not in Konami's hands anymore. The rights to whoever's been publishing Turtles games has been tossed around like a hot potato since the 80s, and no one's really been able to capture the 80s Konami beat 'em up magic. Well, Ubisoft tried when they decided to remake Turtles in Time with Reshelled and made one of the best arcade, SNES, and Genesis beat 'em ups of all time bland as hell. How typical. But around the time Activision got the rights to these 4 dudes with attitudes, they were having a rough go with it. Lots of canceled ports, 5 and 6s out of 10s, and somehow a middling way forward game. Yikes. Also TMNT characters in Tony Hawk 5. Yes. If you've never played TMNT Out of the Shadows, don't. Not like you can, since this was also digital only. Aww. So as a last-ditch effort with the license before phasing all licensed games out, I guess Activision wanted to give it one last try, one more attempt to get something decent out of the Turtles. This, of course, meant hitting up Platinum Games. Setting aside the price point, Transformers Devastation was received pretty well, and so I think a little faith was restored in Platinum being able to potentially knock this out of the park. So come January 2016, only a few months after Devastation released, and a new fancy trailer would drop. One that had an old school comic book art style, one that seriously looked like a return to form, but most importantly, an online 4-player beat 'em up co-op Platinum TMNT game. If those words don't make you excited, then I don't know what will. That trailer honestly looked pretty good. Visually, the game looked great, and the cutscenes looked like they had a lot of effort. I mean, heck, it even harkened back to Mad World and Anarchy Reigns.
So finally, coming out in May 2016 would be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mutants, and Manhattan. The last 2 games had about a year between them, but luckily Platinum and Activision were able to get this one out a mere 6 months later, which happened to coincide with the film's release, the Michael Bay movie. So it was truly a good time for Turtle fans everywhere.
Uh-oh. I said the magic words, the film. Despite having absolutely nothing to do with the Michael Bay movie, despite having the magic talent of Platinum in the cockpit, this game was theoretically rushed to market to coincide with the film. That's never been stated by Platinum or Activision. It's my own conjecture, but I'll be damned if that isn't the case considering it's the same week. The reviews generally went as such: disappointing, repetitive. Wait, is that the biggest complaint here? All right. Let me pull out my stupid contrarian hat here for a second and ask y'all a question. Is this really a 4 out of 10? When this came out, Mutants in Manhattan was the punching bag of the week, the Balan Wonderworld of 2016.
This new punching bag is the tops.
But having sat down and played through the entire game now, I've gotta say, it's not that bad. Let's get into it. The plot is your standard affair for a TMNT thing. A bunch of Turtles villains are off doing some nasty shenanigans, and it's your job to stop them. You'll see the whole peanut gallery: Krang, Bebop, Rocksteady, and even some more obscure villains from the comics like Korra and Armagon. The gameplay itself is a little weird though. There's only one game I can really compare this to actually, and it's Final Fantasy XIV. There's a bit of content in that game where you run around doing mini missions in order to summon a bigger boss fight into the zone by essentially grinding them out. And a lot of the levels in Mutants in Manhattan work this way. You'll zone into a massive open area, run from point A to B, doing whatever missions there, get graded platinum style, and do enough of these in order to make a big boss spawn. Then you'll run over there, smash them up, call it a day, and move on to the next level. You control one turtle at a time, but you can switch between them with the press of 2 buttons. Rather than overcomplicating combat with items, you instead equip 4 abilities that use cooldowns, and you'll do that whole thing. That includes healing fields, team attacks, and big jumps if you need it. The combat is relatively simple, following a platinum formula more similar to Korra or Transformers Devastation than something more complex complex. It's nothing too complicated, but it's also just simple enough to work. Frankly, controlling the turtles is pretty fun. They all feel same-ish due to the mashy nature of the game, but I definitely prefer controlling Michelangelo to say Donatello, which is weird to say because Don is my favorite. The problem is that, well, I kind of just described the entire game. It's 5 hours of that, 5 hours of traveling to levels via your menu, spending arbitrary points to level up, and unlocking skills to potentially play multiplayer with your friends. Which obviously isn't possible these days, but I've heard was actually a decent time. The AI of your companions ain't the greatest, but when you team up with other players trying to beat the harder difficulties, there's something going on. Plus, who doesn't want a multiplayer platinum game? Astral Chain doesn't count. The worst part of all of this is that the game is spongy. Enemies take a stupid amount of damage, even on easier difficulties, so you'll spend a ridiculous amount of time against an enemy doing these same combo strands and waiting for CDs to go down so you can finish them off. And that's not very fun. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's noticeable. Also, because this game has an open level feel to it, that means you'll basically follow the on-screen GPS arrows to get to it, making level design feel less impressive and more of like just rectangular structures in the way, or a never-ending sewer, don't forget that one. Which is a shame, because this game has some awesome moments of visual design. If I have one major thing I want to contest with a lot of the reviews I read, it's calling Mutants and Manhattan ugly. Yeah, sure, it's not like some random UE4 project you'd find on Steam, but you can tell Platinum were invested here. A lot of the characters are modeled like they would come straight out of a comic book, and if you think that's ugly, well, that's just incorrect. The thick cel-shaded shadows look cool in engine. It's got the same charm as Borderlands with the cutscene direction of Platinum. In fact, the whole setup for the last stage here is completely over the top in the most memorable way. It looks like Turtles, it sounds like Turtles. Robbie Damon as Mike, by the way, a perfect choice.
But all your base are belong to us.
It just kind of falls apart at the seams a little bit, and it's definitely because this game feels rushed. It's not like a crazy glitchy game, it functions how it's supposed to. I'd even say that it has a decent amount of polish and charm, but it's clearly lacking just a little oomph. Disappointing? Absolutely. It's the most disappointing game Platinum's ever made. How could it not be? It's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It sells itself. But I think for the 5 hours you play it, with the exception of any mission where you roll on a ball, screw those, it is a decent experience. $60? No, absolutely not. It doesn't even run at 60 FPS on a new platform, and I pay $1 a frame tops. But it's not like you can anymore anyways. Mutants in Manhattan disappeared from all digital store shelves January 3rd, 2017. That's less than a year after it released and nearly a whole year before the other two Platinum games would disappear. And well, that's it. No more licensed games for Activision, heck, no more licensed games for Platinum. So where does that leave us? In hindsight, Platinum said that they were taking on a lot of these licensed games specifically because creating new IPs was difficult. These were really hard times for Platinum, as the Wii U wasn't getting the sales they probably needed to succeed with Wonderful 101, Bayonetta 2, and Star Fox Zero. The middle period of Platinum games is considered to be a rocky one, and it makes sense with Activision essentially turning them into a yearly project studio. It wasn't until after the release of Nier Automata the next year that we'd find out just how rough things were, with Hideki Kamiya saying that Nier literally saved Platinum games. And I'm sure we're all grateful for that.
So there you have it, the ill-fated Platinum Activision trilogy of licensed games. A trio of games that should have by all means just knocked it out of the park every single time. But ultimately, it's one that crumbled under publisher pressure, rushed releases, and absurdly high expectations because it's Platinum games. And frankly, there's not many studios that have ever had that high of an expectation. At the same time, I don't think that any of these games are anywhere near as bad as the internet likes to say that they are, but also, I'm the guy that thinks that Bound Wonderworld is like acceptable. So what do I know? Are video games art? I don't know. Anyways, I've been Austin and that's all for today. If you ever get a chance to play any of these three games, as hard as it is nowadays, I do recommend it if you're like into the licenses or Platinum games in particular. They're not amazing, but I think that they're each They each have some interesting things going on. I'd love if somebody could do something about potentially like preserving these games for the future or having like a digital re-release, but like the world of licensed IP is like a rat's nest that nobody wants to navigate. So catch me next time when I talk about the video games for one of the most successful films of all time. Oh, and also f***ing FTs. Thank you so much for watching. Special Patreon shout out to Blackfoot Ferret, Chris Shelton, Christopher Olivia, Darren Newton, Doug Prince, DX Buster, David Molnar, GM Pinks, Hey Quiggles, Jay Roos, Jacoby Fitzpatrick, Kevin Zanowski, Kieran Arter, Nick Irving, P-Funk, Randall Bentley, and Ryan Talbert. Thank you all so much for your generous support. It's not Happy New Year anymore because that was like 20 days ago or whatever, but this is the first video of the new year and I'm excited to put it out. This one I had to push back a bit, and like on a serious note, things need to change, it's awful, but this is something I've been wanting to do for a very long time, and the focus is platinum, so I hope that's okay with you guys. I'm looking forward to the rest of the year for content. I have a lot of things that I want to put out, and I hope you all enjoy them. Anyways, Happy New Year. Haha.